you would join me in Matthew chapter 17 this morning. Matthew chapter 17. We talked very briefly on Wednesday night on Matthew chapter 17 for a different reason, but we'll get to that here in just a moment. It'll be kind of like a shameless plug for this coming Wednesday, right in the middle of my sermon, I guess, if I remember to do it when we come down to it. But we did talk a little bit about verse 21 on Wednesday night, not its topic, not its context, not its biblical meaning, but we did talk about it as it pertains to biblical translations. But this is such a wonderful, wonderful passage that many of us know. We don't necessarily know the whole thing by heart, but we certainly know, I believe all the way down to where Jesus begins talking about in verse 20, I assure you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain to get up and move, and it will. We love that verse. We know it here by heart, as I point to my brain and my heart. We know it. We throw it out there often. We put it on plaques. We crochet it and frame it and put it on our pillows and all of that. But oftentimes, I believe that sometimes as we are looking through Scripture, well, it's more than I believe, I know, because I do it myself definitely. But sometimes it is very dangerous in the way we do that because we're actually putting the part of the Scripture that's the answer to the question rather than giving people what the question was to begin with. And that's part of our series today. In other words, a series that we've been going on all summer. We probably got today and maybe one more next week, depending on how things go. But it is essentially that we've got questions, and of course, Jesus has the answers. It's basically going through a few scriptures throughout the summer, looking at different questions that different people, mainly John the Baptist and or the disciples or someone else, had asked to Christ. And then we look at his answer to them. And that is the point of all of this particular passage here in Matthew 17, beginning in verse 14. We see that there is a question answered or asked, and it is the mustard seed that comes as a part of the answer. It's almost kind of like sometimes, just like we do in our medical profession, we love to treat symptoms instead of the disease, right? You know why that is? Politics aside, it's because a healed person is no longer a paying customer. Okay? So what we do is that oftentimes we will promote the symptom or medicate the symptom rather than going after the problem itself. And it's a lot like this here in this passage. I know it's kind of confusing. We'll get to it here in just a moment. But in this passage, the mustard seed, okay, is the answer to the problem. It's this passage, while about faith, it's a little deeper than that. So many people will say that if I have enough faith, just the faith of a mustard seed, I could walk up to this building or to that mountain or to that stone and tell it to do something, and boom, it's going to do it because that's what Scripture says. Well, if you read this in correct context, that's not necessarily what Christ is trying to tell you. He's not saying that we're a bunch of believers that can go around because of our faith and do magic shows for people. That's not what he's saying. Matter of fact, when you read the entirety of the context of this chapter, specifically what happened before in the transfiguration on the mountain, Jesus took 3 disciples onto the mountain with him for the transfiguration, right? Peter, James, and John, and Jesus. There was 4 total people. Well, not including the transfiguration folks, right? So there was 4 total people on that mountain, and Jesus left how many disciples below? Well, if there was 3, right, and there's 12 total disciples, how many were on the ground? 9. That's a very important piece to the puzzle, believe it or not, when it comes to 14 through 21. You have to understand who, first of all, this Father brought originally his son to, which was the 9, right? Not the 12 plus Jesus, just the 9, right? And then when Jesus and the 3 came down off of the mountain, he took, and we're so bad about this, I am too, as a measure of last resort, he's done everything, including taking them to those 9, right? as a measure of last resort, when he sees Jesus and the other three coming down off the mountain, he runs over and he falls at the feet. There is a bigger account of this in Mark chapter 9 if you want to read it. There's a few more things in Mark chapter 9 that aren't here, and there's a few things here that aren't in Mark chapter 9, okay? I believe that this particular passage here in Matthew does better for what we want to talk about today, but they're the same thing. So if you want to get the full general picture of what's going on, read Mark chapter 9 when it talks about this story as well, okay? But when he goes to the foot of Christ and he drops down on his knees with his son and he both, this is in Mark chapter 9, asked Jesus for healing. And the other 9 couldn't do it, even though Jesus had given power and authority for those 9 to do just that. Why couldn't they heal? What was the difference? Why all of a sudden did they not have what they needed in the moment they needed it? Well, Jesus answers that in verse 21 and 20. That's what the question is all about. The disciples will ask the question, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we overcome this problem? By the way, that's today's title. How do I overcome my problems? Our problems. Fits nice and well with our current virus and COVID. How do we overcome our problems? And Jesus comes back with a wonderful answer. The answer is the one that we crochet on everything. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, you could tell the mountain to get up and move, and it will. And then verse 21 kicks in, and if you have an NIV or a New English translation or a few others, you will see that there is no verse 21. It ends in verse 20. You can look it up if you want to. You can look at it all you want to. The NIV and other Bibles have chosen to leave verse 21 out. But it is my opinion, and Mark, by the way, Mark 9:29, I believe, puts it in. The NIV actually leaves it out. It has a little footnote there where 21 used to be, and then you're supposed to go follow the footnote, and the footnote on the bottom says, oh, by the way, this could or could not possibly be here. Some versions of the Bible, especially the New English translation, will actually completely remove it and not even give it the benefit of a footnote. Your guess is as good as mine. Philosophers and scholars will try to debate over and over on why some translations add some things and why some translations take away some things. Your guess is ultimately as good as mine, I guess, depending on the original source they went back to in order to do their translation, I'm sure. That's the best argument that I would give anyway. By the way, this is what Wednesday night, here's the shameless plug, that's what Wednesday night is all about. Last Wednesday and this Wednesday is finding a good, accurate biblical translation and knowing which one to trust and which one maybe not to trust quite as much as you think you do, or you should. Because not every translation is created equal. Now, the Bible in of itself is true, infallible, without error, right? The holy inspired word of God. But man, I as a human being can twist and turn that all over the place. We know that. And people who translate some of these biblical Bibles are not immune to that. Okay? So you have to be extra careful. That's why we discussed on Wednesday night just quickly some of the Bibles, translations that go back to the right type of sources and are most accurate. So come on Wednesday night and we'll continue to discuss some of that. But as we continue to look through this particular passage, verse 21 to me is an extremely important piece of the puzzle. We love the faith of a mustard seed, okay? And that is part of the answer that he gives the disciples and the people. But verse 21 is the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey often said. So oftentimes we note that our translation removes things that could be very dangerous because it leaves out some very important pieces to the puzzle, okay? So let's read as we go, and we're going to discuss The three answers that Jesus gives are not three ways necessarily, because if you say there's three ways to overcome your problems, it makes it sound like you do one of the three and you'll get there. That's not what this is saying. He said there's one way, but in that one way there are three steps, okay? So step 1, 2, and 3 are necessary to overcome my problems. All right, so let's see what Jesus' answer is. Let's look at the disciples, and now that it's kind of in some context and kind of firmed up a little bit, remember that Jesus had been up on the mountain with Peter, James, and John at the Transfiguration. They were coming down the mountain now, and the disciples had been trying to do some things, obviously trying to heal in this particular case, and they were unable to do it. And now Jesus, and it says this in verse 14, and we'll kind of talk as we go along, and there at the very end I'll quickly go through the three quick and relatively easy steps that oftentimes we don't put together, or we just, in our own power try to take care of the problem, but ultimately we just don't give it to Jesus correctly in a lot of ways. So we'll see those kind of here towards the end. So let's read Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. 14 through 21, all the verses will be on your screen as well. All right, it says this. When they reached the crowd, when Jesus, Peter, James, and John reached the crowd, a man approached and knelt down before him. Lord, he said, have mercy on my son, because he has seizures and suffers severely. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. Now, this is very important. I know that you would say, well, most all Scripture is very important. It is. But sometimes we skip over a lot of things and don't really give it the in-depth thought, because this is so simple. Okay, the disciples came down the hill. The 9 met Jesus and the other 3, and they're sitting there, and this guy comes and collapses at Jesus' feet, and he asks Jesus to heal the son. Great, moving forward. But there's a lot more emotion in this than just that simple read over, okay? Think about it. Every one of us in here is a parent or a grandparent, at the very least, maybe an aunt or an uncle. We all in our life have had some child in some way, form, or fashion that we have cared unconditionally for, okay? There is no doubt in my mind that if a speeding train was going to hit one of my children and or my wife, I wouldn't blink an eye about stepping in front of a speeding train and pushing them out of the way. We all know that, right? There is nothing that I would not do to protect the ones that are closest to me, even until giving my own life in the process. Man, that's a story about Jesus all in of itself, right? But that emotional charge that you have as an aunt or an uncle or a father or a mother or someone that maybe you have younger cousins or whatever it is, that emotional charge that you get, or that connection that you get from being in that relationship with that individual, gives you the power, okay, to do a lot of things that you really normally would think twice about. Okay, if it's just me and a train's passing by, I'm not dumb enough to jump in the middle of it, right? But that connection with my family and that God-given principle and desire to be the protector as the father, the fixer, the nurturer as a mother or an aunt or an uncle, whatever that relationship may be, kicks into overdrive, and you react regardless of how dumb it's going to come out to be. I know that if I jump in front of a speeding train to save my child, it's not going to end well for me. But I do it anyway. Why is that? You love your children unconditionally, to the point that you would give everything you have and are to protect them, whatever that may be. I've often said this from the pulpit, brothers and sisters. I said, you could take a big old boat art fence post and hit me across the head, and I'll say, thank you, may I have another? But you come over after one of my children or wife, it's going to be a bad day for me and you probably. Okay? You know what I'm saying? I think anybody and everybody would agree with something of that nature. It's just going to be bad. And I don't care if my child is 100 years old or 2 weeks old or 30 seconds old or still in the womb. I feel the same way. Would you agree? Okay. So this father had reached the end of his rope. I don't know what all the things he did prior to this, but we can assume a lot. He probably took him to a doctor. Who knows what all he did? He tried all kinds of stuff. And then he took him to where first after that? He took him to the 9 disciples. Now, help me with this, brothers and sisters. And I'm not saying that I'm not grateful. I'm not saying that I don't want to help. But oftentimes, do we find ourselves taking our problems to the deacons or the preachers or the church leaders or the song leader before we take it to God? Do we? And maybe it's just this. I don't know. Maybe it's just this. Maybe it's that we bring ourselves to these people first because they can better help us connect to God, maybe. Maybe that's it. That's possibly very much true in many cases, if not all cases, for some reason. But ultimately, you can see yourself as this father in this moment with this child have run out of all options, took them to the disciples. They could not do anything with this kid. And then Jesus, that's right. Let's bring him or my child to him. That should have been the first thing. What do you think? We could save ourselves a lot of issue and a lot of problems if we just take it to where it needs to go to first. Found that out kind of the hard way through constructing my home. If I'd have just took it to the right person the first time, I probably wouldn't have had a lot of problems, right? Don't get me wrong, my contractor's done a wonderful job, but let me tell you, sometimes you wonder, man, why? Man, it's going to take 6 months to do this. What's going on, okay? So we keep moving forward. He's got that emotional draw with his son, and everything is kind of to the point to where now he sees Jesus, and he's kind of like, oh, yes, there's Jesus. I hear he can do so many things. Let's bring him over there. So 16, the father says, I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't do anything. 17, Jesus is reply. Now, I will just go ahead and say this. If any preacher said these words from the pulpit, he'd be in the bread line in just a few moments. Most likely. Okay? You know, I always said that evangelists have it made well because they can come in and say it and leave and not have to worry about the fallout. Okay? But these words that Jesus says are haunting. They are self-revealing. They make you dig deep into the side of your heart and see the places that only he sees, that you neglect to look at sometimes, that try to hide away. Jesus is referring to these places not just to the dad and the son and especially the disciples and especially the 9 disciples, but everybody that is around. He's about to just tell them the way it is. He says, you unbelieving and rebellious generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him here. Whew. Now, just to be clear, I'm quoting Jesus on that. Just to be clear. But if you had a preacher get up here and say, how long must I put up with you and bring, how much longer? That's not a good thing, is it? Now, I don't feel that way. I'm not saying I do, but I am saying Jesus' blunt and direct answer that he's giving them. Okay? He's calling a spade a spade. He's telling it like it is. You know, an old phrase, he's telling them how the cow eats the cabbage. He's just being blunt and straightforward with them. There's no sugarcoating. Verse 18. Then Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And from that moment, the boy was healed. Verse 19. Then the disciples approached Jesus privately. Shh, Jesus, come over here. We don't want to sound silly, but we got a question. We've been there before, right? I don't want to ask this question, even though it kind of sounds a little silly, but and not only was it kind of a silly, I guess they really, it's hard. You try to steer clear of trying to put too much emotion within Scripture because you don't want to get it wrong, okay? But I can just feel that they would need to bring Jesus aside and say, hey, I couldn't do it. What makes you do it? Well, first of all, my name's Jesus. That should have been the answer. You know what I'm saying? But he doesn't say that. They pull him out to the side, and they says, why couldn't we drive out this demon? Verse 20 is the answer to that question. They basically say this. When they say, why couldn't we drive it out? They're saying, how do I overcome my problems? Their problem was that they could not cast out the demon in the young man. And they were frustrated, I'm sure. They couldn't figure it out. It's worked up to this point. What changed? How do I overcome that? And Jesus' answer is clear. Here's where the context comes in to that verse that we love so much, and it is a great verse. Verse 20. He answers them, because of your little faith. Now here's why it's so important to know the context to what's going on here. Now remember, Jesus had taken 3 to the Mount Transfiguration, right? And he left the 9. It was the 9 that couldn't cast the demon out. It wasn't Jesus and the other 3, right? Because it was just the 9. Why? Just trying to think critically. Why would there be a difference between the 9 and the 3 in the ability to do what God gave them the power to do? You ever wondered that? Why could the 9 not take care of it? Do you think they might have been a little miffed that Jesus chose 3 and not them? Well, you always pick John and that fiery Peter and James. I mean, come on. Why you always pick those 3? You leave me out here on the bottom taking care of all this, doing all the hard work, and you're over there playing footsies with the other on top of the mountain? Do you ever feel like there might have been a little resentment that went on amongst the 12 every once in a while? You know, we say that John was the disciple that Jesus loved. Do you think that Jesus showed favoritism? No, I don't. But do you think they felt like he showed favoritism? Yeah, it's very possible. But this is why I think in so many ways that they could not accomplish what they were set out to accomplish because their faith was dormant, because they were upset and not grateful. And they were probably griping and complaining and I can't believe. And hey, we as people, we all do that. We're not immune to that. I do it. We all do it. Okay? But I guarantee you, I almost can 100% guarantee you that this had a lot to do with why they could not cast out the demon in that moment. Because their faith was dormant. It couldn't be that they had a little, because obviously the verse says if you have a faith of a mustard seed, just a little, it would have worked, right? So the obvious opinion and conclusion must be that their faith was not even a mustard seed. It wasn't even a little. It was gone. It was little. It was dormant. It was not active. They were not working in their faith, basically. What were they working in if they were not working in their faith? Their self. Now, how do I overcome my problems? Do you work within yourself or do you work within your faith? That's what this passage is about. It's not just about faith. While it is, it's about overcoming my problems with my faith instead of my personal way of doing it. That's what this is all about. See, because the dad got to the end of his rope, right? The disciples, the 9, got to the end of their rope. And they finally, at the end of all the ropes, saw Jesus and went, oh, yes, let's go to him. He can do it. And they went. And of course, Jesus cast out the demon. And then the disciples, why couldn't we do that? And his answer is, because your faith, you have none. You have very little. You're on empty in your faith. How many times, this is Jesus, how many times must I tell you disciples that without faith, nothing is possible? With faith, it all is possible. And he even goes as far as saying, just a little faith is all you need. It doesn't have to be a big faith. It needs to be just a little bit. That's what he's saying. Just a little bit of faith can help me overcome my problems. Just a little bit. You know, I think the biggest problem when it comes to our faith and living out our faith in our life is I don't want to say it is, but it isn't at the same time. I almost feel like that, I don't even know how to say this without sounding crazy and stupid. Well, pretty much everything I say probably sounds crazy and stupid, so I might as well just say it, right? Okay? So, but I really, really think that we're almost conditioned not to live by faith. And why I say that is because we expect immediate results in everything in our life. My children are terrible about this. And believe it or not, most everyone in here struggles with it in some way, form, or fashion. We expect immediate results. High-speed internet. Man, if my kids were alive when I first got internet, it took 7 hours to download one 3-minute song off Napster. Now, if it doesn't happen in 2 seconds, they're going crazy. What's taking so long? We have been conditioned that immediate results is the only thing that matters. And if it doesn't happen immediately, there's something wrong. If I am not pulling up to the window at the barbecue place or at the Dairy Queen or something, and my food is not already hanging out the window, I got a problem with it. Lord forbid they ask me to pull around and wait for 3 minutes. I'm telling you, go home, buy the groceries, and cook that meal. It'll take you 3 hours, but you won't make 3 minutes for your meal on the other side of the store. We have been conditioned for immediate results. Jesus doesn't always work on immediate results. Why have we allowed our faith to get so dormant? It's because we're waiting on an immediate result. We're waiting for a shelf-built faith that you can buy at Walmart rather than a customized faith that is delivered by the power of God himself. And that takes years and years and years to learn and to develop. But we don't want it that way. We want to rub our little genie in the bottle when we have a problem and say, Jesus, fix it. And then when he comes and he gives you your one of your 3 wishes, like in Aladdin, we'll stick him back in the bottle and put him back in our pocket and then forget he exists for the rest of the day. That's not faith. That's a magic show. Brothers, Jesus is not a pocket material. You don't pull him out when you need him. We need him all the time. And faith is a walk that is long-term, not short, immediate gratification. And the disciples had got to the point where they did not have enough gratification. They were tired of this favoritism-picking Jesus who just took a certain 3. They all wanted to go see the show, left us down here doing all the dirty work, and now we can't even do it. What's going on? You see their frustration? You see how our frustration can be their frustration sometimes? Absolutely. Brothers and sisters, when you read for the rest of this in 20 and 21, it says, because of your little faith, he told them, for I assure you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain, move from here, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. However, here's that verse 21 that's deleted in so many editions of the Bible, okay? Here's why this verse is so important. Because they're saying if they delete 21 and just leave it at 20, you're left with faith as little of a mustard seed. And that's good. I'm not saying it's bad advice. It's good. But there's two more pieces to the puzzle that are left out. Remember I said this isn't three separate ways to fix our problems? I said this is one way that has 3 steps. Well, you're missing step 2 and 3. That's the problem with deleting that verse. Okay? So when you look at verse 21, it says, however, this kind does not come out except by what? Prayer and fasting. I think those are 2 very important pieces to the puzzle about solving and overcoming my problems that we leave out because we don't like them or we forget to do it. And I say we, I'm in that too. I'm not saying you. I'm saying we, as a world, as a people, as believers, we love the little faith because that means all we got to do is just enough and we can move a mountain. It's not what he's saying. He's saying, disciples, even if you had just a little bit, you could have done this. It doesn't say stop at a little. It says even if you just had a little bit, you could have done it. But you didn't do it, so obviously you didn't even have a little. That's what he's saying. And then you come back to verse 21. It says, however, this kind does not come out without except by prayer and fasting. Brothers and sisters, whatever difficulties life offers, Christ offers all you need to get through them. And he's telling you how to do that right here. He's telling you how to do that right here. And we're going to run straight through these 3 because they're quick. You know them. It's not a problem. We just need to reiterate them sometimes. Okay? I'll say this. The wisdom to understand the problem. This is what Jesus gives us. The power to overcome that problem, which is what we're talking about today. Okay? And the love to help us get through that problem. I think that's a God that's a good, good Father, don't you? Any circumstance that you're in your life, you can count on that if you have faith and if you put these other 2 things, the fasting and prayer, you have the wisdom to understand the problem. Geez, maybe that comes from prayer and fasting. Wouldn't you say? Okay. The power to overcome the problem, that could be faith. Just a thought. And then the love of God to help you get through that problem. He doesn't say he's fixing it. He says he'll walk you through it. There's a big difference, wouldn't you say? Because here's the deal when it comes to growing faith. Like I said, we want it instant. We want it perfect. We want it easy. But it's not. Because faith growing does one of 2 things. Either helps us get better. Well, shall I say the problem does 2 things. It helps us grow in our faith, or it shows us our lack of faith. It's up to you on which one that is. So let me tell you in verse 20, real quick, verse 20, you'll see that the first step of the 3 problem solving for our problems is to use the faith you have even if it's small. That's what that passage is saying. Use the faith you have even if it's small. It's not saying keep it small. It's saying even if it is small, use what you got because that small is enough. But he doesn't want to keep you with that small. He wants to grow it even more and more and more and more. That's the part we don't like. The second thing is increase your prayer time. Increase your prayer. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be full of words that are $20 words that only Jesus could even know if you said them anyway, probably. You know, I firmly believe that sometimes just a cry for just a groaning help says more than some of those long drawn-out prayers and has more effect. A plea for a child, your child. Is there a difference when they're talking to you about something that's all over the place? Can you tell the difference when your child is upset versus in trouble? When you hear them talk? Can you tell by the tone of the voice whether they were the ones who did it or something was done by them or something was done to them by someone else? You can tell that. And my brothers and sisters, I'm not saying a long drawn-out prayer is bad. I'm not. Please don't misunderstand that. But I'm saying even a small something is valuable. That's what Jesus is saying after all, right? Even just the smallest is better than nothing. Use it. Because even if you have just that small, it can move that mountain just as much as that big thing over there. That's what he's saying. So increase our prayer life. You know, and I read this as a quote. It says, when you go through life without prayer, you're putting the power of God on the shelf in your life. That's the problem of the disciples. They got down there on the bottom of that mountain, those 9. They got to complaining and grouping and arguing and all this other stuff. And they got to doing other things. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, they went out there to that demon in their own mind and their own power, and it didn't work. They had left the prayerful state behind. They left the groan behind in that moment. It's not that they didn't have faith. It's that it just was dormant. All right? That's what Christ is saying. The third one and final one is the step that most of us know, and you'll see these here in verse 20 and 21. You saw the faith, even if it's a little. Verse 20, verse 21, the one that's removed, you see it's easy. However, this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting, okay? The third example is increase your discipline. Oh, no, we don't like discipline, especially millennials and after. We don't like discipline, do we? We don't like for schools to tell us what to do. We're going to do what we want, even though schools are putting authority over us. We have the tendency to look at our parents and say, I don't like the way you're talking to me, and you can just leave, man. If I'd have told that to my mama, woo! You know, here I'm coming up on 40. I still won't be awake. It probably knocked me clean through this pastorate and straight to heaven. You know, I'll never forget one time my grandfather, he was, a good guy, but I remember one time that he was trying to be earnest and supportive and teach me something. And he drove up and he stopped and he said, son, I want to ask you a question. Do you know what kind of tree that is? And he was legitimately trying to teach me the differences between trees. We lived in the country. That was good information to have. It may not be here, but it was good there. Okay? I said, a shade tree. It wasn't pretty, folks. Discipline is so removed from our society. It's removed from our children. It's removed from many adults. How many of you spent time in the armed forces? Oh, yeah. There are a few of us. What happened if your discipline was lagging? Not that you would ever think of doing such a thing, but what would happen if your discipline was lagging? I've not been there, but I can only imagine. Probably didn't work out too well, did it? I bet it only happened once, if it even happened then. Right? Okay. Yeah, I'm just throwing that out there. But why is it so important in the military that they teach you discipline? I may be wrong. Please don't correct me if I am, because it just kills the sermon point. Just bear with me here. I been on vacation. I'm long-winded. Okay. Could it be that discipline will save your life in a tough situation? Could it be that? Could it be that those put in authority over you need to have that discipline so they can better save your life and protect your life when the stuff gets a little hairy? Could it be? Could it be that things work so much better if there is discipline? Could it be that your life could be saved because of discipline? Could it be that your problem is solved because of discipline? That's what the word fasting means. Discipline. Now, I had a joke with a church member this morning. I said, well, I'm going on a fast. I'm going to give away asparagus and, tomatoes. My son loves tomatoes. I don't like raw tomatoes. I eat them in anything, but raw, forget it. I don't like the texture. But for fasting this year, I'm giving up those two things. How much discipline does it take to get rid of something you hate to begin with? That's not discipline. Discipline is getting rid of something that you know is going to be tough. That's what fasting is all about. It could be that you give away tea. I love tea. Whew. Okay? Could be that you give away pizza. Whatever it is, it doesn't even have to be food. That's one thing that people so misunderstand. Fasting is not just about food. It's about giving up something that is important to you and placing it aside so that you can be more disciplined in your prayer life and your Bible reading and in your relationship with God. You take what you gave away. If you gave away dinner, man, I love dinner, okay? Life is not the same without dinner. If I was to give away dinner and then take that time and go turn on my TV and watch the Andy Griffith Show, that's not discipline. I just replaced one thing that I liked with something else that I liked. That sounds terrible when I put it that way. But I'll tell you this. If I get rid of dinner and replace that with prayer and Bible study and relationship with Jesus, then I have learned a discipline. And it's a discipline that very well may save my life. And it's a discipline that may save my children's life. And it is a discipline that may save the life of our church one day. It is a discipline that is necessary. And these are the things the disciples did not have. They have not been praying. Their faith was empty. And they had no discipline. That's why they couldn't do what God called them to do. Your faith is empty. You have no discipline. Your prayer life is terrible. That's what Jesus is saying. One thing that I really love about Acts, there's a chapter in the book of Acts. If they'll put it on the screen, this is the last thing. Acts 19, verses 15 and 16. I want to show you something. Acts chapter 19. This is, honestly, I do a series. I'm going to do it on Wednesday nights soon. It's called Funny but True or Strange but True Bible Stories. The stuff that makes you kind of go, that's funny or that's weird. Like when the kids got eaten by the bear because they made fun of the bald man. Things like that. They're kind of humorous. They make us laugh, but they have good meaning. This is one of those. This is a segment. This is just 2 verses of it. It says, the evil spirit answered them. This is a few Jewish leaders who decided they were going to cast out a demon, much like the disciples here. Okay? It says this, after they say, be gone, demon. Then the evil spirit answered them, I know Jesus, and I recognize Paul. Who are you? Goes on. Then the man who had the evil spirit leaped on them, overpowered them all, and prevailed against them so that they ran out the house naked and wounded. They got the clothes beat off of them. Literally. That's funny. It's not, but it is. Why did it not work? Well, the answer is in the verse before that. Right there, the verse, believe what the first verse of that. That one, yeah. The evil spirit answered them, well, I know Jesus. He could have done it. I recognize that Paul name you said. He could have done it. Who are you? See, the difference between Jesus and Paul is whose power that comes into play. If they're saying, be gone in my own power, that's what's going to happen to you. Stay in your house, folks. You're going to get beat. But Jesus is saying, even if you had just the smallest morsel of faith, and if it was brought about by prayer and fasting and serious discipline, he said, you'd be amazed of what you can solve. It's not that your problem's going to go away. It's just that maybe you'll grow to understand it a little better. Because, you know, sometimes when a problem ends badly in our minds, it's not necessarily bad. Think about it. If someone was very close and loving to you was to pass away after a long battle, and you reached your hand up and you got angry because God didn't answer your prayers. You prayed for no pain. You prayed for no suffering. Well, if they're in heaven, there is no pain and there is no suffering. That's an answered prayer. That's a prayer of the faithful. Brothers and sisters, today I want to encourage you as we finish up and our praise team comes forward. When it comes to solving our problems in this world, when it doesn't matter what it is. It can be something small and seemingly trivial. It can be something as big as COVID. It can be something as big as a life-shattering and altering moment that you just have reached your wit's end and you bring it before the cross and you say, Jesus, help me. My faith is so small. He's going to say, but that's all you need. Just a little. Bring it to him in faith. With prayer and fasting. And however it ends up, I guarantee you, you will be okay with it. Because you have sought the holy throne of God in your circumstance. There's a story real quick about a church in South Korea. It has over 700,000 members in this church. Yeah, huge church, beyond what we can all imagine. Okay, in South Korea nonetheless. Okay. And what they do is they don't actually counsel people when they come in. When people comes into the pastor, he does not counsel them. The church literally bought a mountain. How rich is that? They bought a mountain, okay? And it's not far from the church. And when somebody comes in to get counsel, and the pastor says, you know what? I would love to help you, but I think there's a better course of action. Why don't you go up on top of that mountain, and you can pray, and you can fast, and you can seek God's face, and he'll answer your problem. Sometimes they come back after 3 days. Well, I don't know the answer. Well, why don't you go for 7? They come back. No 7. Well, why don't you stay for a couple of weeks? They just keep sending them back up there until God answers their question. You know what that does? That instills discipline. That instills prayer. And that instills faith. I'm telling you guys, I look at something like that and my first thought is, man, it's going to be hot up there. We got to get serious about this, guys. What's more important? Brothers and sisters, 3 things. Faith of a mustard seed. Not a lot. Doesn't take a lot. And then prayer and fasting. That's how you solve all your problems. If you would stand, please, with me as we go through our invitation. Just a verse or two.